So, hi everybody. My name is Mark Reed from Heaven Media, and I was really excited when Sam asked me for my help on this one, as esports is something that is a real passion of mine, and it's something that I felt like I fell into about 15 years ago, and since then. Spent a lot of that time beating the drum about esports. And I think there has been a real evolution, both in the UK, but also globally for esports. And I think some of the things that we have seen that have been those catalysts for change in that time are elements that, as developers and people interested in this area of the market, can take some learnings from, I hope. And I hope that some of that insight will get people to have some more context, especially for those of you that maybe have that passion for wanting to develop games in the direction of competitive play, but possibly haven't had that experience to just see that industry evolve. So for me today, I want to talk a little bit about that and hopefully help give some things for you to think about in that regard. Also, I would like you to note that when you've been doing it for 15 years, you do get to spell esports however you want to. Much to the dismay, I have to say, for anybody that works for me under the age of 30, as I'm often chastised for, but one of the benefits for that. So I guess I should probably start with really, why do we know anything about this space? Because today, Heaven Media is a marketing agency. So we help game developers and publishers and hardware brands manage their social media, their community channels, their content, help them find influencers, team sponsors where applicable, events, more digital today, but we know that they're coming back in their physical form at some time. Video animation, and now have also Europe's largest gaming PR team as well, that we're now expanding over to the US. We have teams, or we have a team now of 80+ people across Europe, North America, Australia, and China. And I guess our responsibility for our clients is really to help them shape what their audience wants to hear, and it's not always in line with what they want to say, so it's really just helping them shape that narrative. I think also helping them understand where the conversation actually is, or is best for their game or product. Now, as I said, 15 years, but we kind of woke up one day about 7 years ago and realized we're an agency. But I want to talk a second about where we were before that, because 15 years ago, and James Dean, who you just heard from, will know this, as we were very much friends and dealing together back then. At that point is when I started by acquiring a number of websites, so media companies. One was called Driver Heaven, which I quickly changed to Hardware Heaven because nobody actually knew what a graphics driver was. And I also acquired 4 websites, CAD Red, Tech9, a website called ECL, and Crossfire. And through that, learned really a lot about the esports market. And I also learned what to do and what not to do. As a great example, in my aspirations to develop what I visualized as the Sky Sports of esports back 14, 15 years ago, I thought that putting all of those websites together under one umbrella of Esports Heaven, which does still exist today, and putting 4 communities of esports gamers together, that I could start down this journey of my Sky Sports ESPN for all things esports, only to find that when you put 4 very different communities together, you just end up with one very small one, as they all leave and find a better home where they can talk, discuss, and relate to those people that play the games that they like to, and not hang around with others that don't. So I suppose, why do we know anything? It's probably because we've made most mistakes that you are probably likely to make it at esports. But through that journey of the last 15 years, I think that we understand the audience and understand what they want, both from being associated with a brand, but I think hopefully for the context of this discussion, also what makes a esports and competitive game. So I'll just watch this for a second, because this is my kind of meditation, really. But the reason for showing this is that whilst Pong, I'm not sure, was ever heavily played competitive, and I'm not really going to profess this to be the first esports game by any standards, but the reason why I love this is it's probably one of the earliest examples that I can show of a game that is incredibly well balanced, possibly one of the most purest in that regards. And that's what I would like for many of you thinking about esports games, to understand that, and I really can't say this more profoundly enough, that if a game is not balanced, then it is impossible to be an esports game. We can't develop a game where we have the ability to buy faster boots to make you run faster in your gameplay, or a big gun or BFG to overpower the play. That there can't be any quick pay way to avoid the grind. It just needs to be balance, and where the only way to win is simply you. It's the person behind the controls, the decision making, the reactions. And really made more simple, if we think about it, that's how sports works. It's the same field of play the world over, and it's skill and hard work, where the winner can come from anywhere. And we'll come back to this point in a bit. Again, our history of esports, and really the evolution has not been a fast one by gaming standards. Esports games were played more than, frankly, most other games, but they never hit the headlines. They were not something that was talked about in any of the mainstream gaming press, magazines, or even early online. And it begs the question, why? Well, one of the reasons is that, frankly, it's PC only. They existed on dedicated servers, and there was no revenue really there for those big, horrible games publishers that really only wanted to push out another version of Tony Hawk or Guitar Hero. And frankly, until Twitch came along, there wasn't really any central point where you could see the scale or the size of this audience. I remember talking to people in early to late 2000s about the size of the Counter-Strike audience, or this game League of Legends as that came onto the scene. And frankly, I was looked at or regarded in disbelief. And physically, they didn't believe me, because there wasn't that reference point to be able to then go and prove the size and scale of that audience. Even though we knew that these games were being played by tens of millions, frankly, no one cared. But what I want to spend a little bit of time on, which I think is most interesting, is where these games came from. Because one thing is for sure, they never came from a position of a game development team that wanted to set out to build an esports game that in the future would be played by large teams, multi-million-dollar franchises on large scale stages with fireworks and streamed to millions of people on multiple devices. If we start with something such as Quake had a mod that was called Quake Team Fortress, which was then copied by a little company called Valve to make a Half-Life mod similar to that called Team Fortress 2. And spoiler for that probably wouldn't have made a way for the likes of Overwatch. Counter-Strike is a mod from Half-Life 2. If we look at the MOBA scene, which is one of the largest genres in gaming, that was defined by a mod for StarCraft. If we look at Warcraft 3, there was a famous modder called Carl Summer who released a mod for it called Defense of the Agents, so also known as Dota, and that's back in 2002. One of them went to work for Valve and made Dota 2, again, one of the biggest esports games in the world. Now, we're here to talk about esports, and I would say that my personal opinion is that Battle Royale games is more on the periphery of esports. But as Crafton is now worth $8 billion or so, I thought you might not mind a little bit of a tangent, again, to try and give you that insight to that mod evolution of some of the games that are most loved today. So DayZ, for those of you who can remember, a huge game, or even still is to this day. And before DayZ was its own game, it was a mod of Arma 2. Now, a gentleman by the name of Brendan Green's BR mod began as that Arma 2 mod, and when DayZ moved into more of a standalone game, Brendan shifted it to a mod of Arma 3. A few years later, was hired as a consultant for H1Z1's Battle Royale mode, or King of the Hills, many of you might know it as. And then Brendan Green, also known as Player Unknown, joined a small South Korean developer called Blue Hull, and the creation of PUBG and the rest, as many of you know. So I think that that modding element is something that is incredibly important to understand from the development of esports. And hopefully I'll come on to explaining a little bit why now, because it's about what it tells us. Now, it could tell us that the best game developers in the world are a bunch of part-timers that can't get a job as a developer. But I would see it probably more so that what is it that made them go out there and build these games that are still played? And when we look at League of Legends and Dota and Counter-Strike, some 10, probably more like 15 years on from when they were originally developed, getting close to 20 years with the likes of StarCraft and original Dota. And for me, these games never needed millions of dollars to make them great esports games. And I actually truly believe that, actually, of any game. I think if you put community at the heart of that game, then you will always end up building a game that will win. And esports, for me, within all of gaming, have probably one of the most focused, often most critical gaming communities that you can get. Now, again, if we think about how that modding of the community to help build that game has ended up with these games that are still played in their tens of millions, and in many circumstances in excess of 100 million people that play those games, we can see that we can look into the reasons as to how that those games were evolved. And we know that they were the ones that were going to be playing the game. They were building it for themselves. They didn't often take that that position that you often find with game developers, where they're often building it for someone else. Now, I'm not saying that games developers often aren't passionate about what they're building. They almost invariably always are. But when games were built from mods, it was for them to play. It was a project. And through that process, that it was also meant that they were the ones that were testing it. So they were the ones that were also themselves, and that community were the ones that were responsible for getting it polished. It wasn't the game testing house. It wasn't the closed beta. It was themselves, and they were their own biggest critic in order to get that game polished off. Then thirdly, they will be the ones that will lose unfairly if it wasn't balanced. So when you speak to a lot of those people that were those earlier modders, Carl and Brendan, they would always tell you that for them, they wanted something that they knew they weren't going to get their ass kicked unfairly in, and that gave them that drive to make sure that it was balanced. I think lastly, they exist within that community, the community that helped them build it, helped them polish it off, and helped them play it. And I think often what we see as a very moaning, grumpy, hater-filled community are going to flame the hell out of them if they don't get it right. And that's a definite kind of carrot and stick, because also they also get held as the hero, the kind of Tony Stark, as it were, of the community, if it was done right. And that motivation that transcended anything to do with revenue, finance, and payback is what I believe really helped them make games successful and fit the audience, fit the community, and really provided that authenticity and provided that credibility for those games to be successful. So look, was it blind success? Probably in a way, yes. I don't think it means that you can't be the Donald Trump or Gordon Gekko on the inside wanting to make your game take over the world. But it certainly means that you need to make sure you're a bit more Greta Thunberg, Keanu Reeves on the outside in order to really make sure that that community knows that you're doing it for them, or indeed you're one of them. And if I relate that back to my own business, Heaven Media is about making sure that when we're helping brands come to market, that they have that authenticity and credibility, that the things that they're saying show that they are one of them. I think also to leave you with is that balanced element that I mentioned earlier. It will get you if you end up rushing to have that little bit of DLC pushed out at the last minute. Mind you, who am I kidding? You guys love to do everything at the last minute, but we just need to be careful that you don't turn Pong into, I don't know, Star Wars Battlefront 2. It's important that through that rush to add more features and to add more what you believe benefit doesn't take away from that purer side. And it can, and you can still create fantastic games through that. But if it's looking for that competitive play, dare I say, an esport one day, then those are the bits that unfortunately will be the elements that will get rejected by that community. And it is that community, as we heard earlier when James was talking, that is what will make it the success. It will give it that inertia in order for that to that game to have that longevity of games like Counter-Strike and Dota and League of Legends and even StarCraft, but also have people continue to passionately play and evolve an ecosystem around it. And lastly, it really is those kind of that key mantra of learning to listen. And looking to evolve that product over time and at any stage, before, during, post-launch. And as I put there, even pivot. Some of the best games started off as one thing and then turned into something else. Who knows? You might be thinking about building a race game, and trust me, iRacing in esports is only getting bigger and bigger. But it's okay to pivot. Maybe those racing cars can hit big oversized footballs, say, and shoot in a goal. I don't know, but it is okay to be able to change that if the community are able to kind of push you in that direction. So that is all that I have for you. I really hope, even if there's just one person today, that helps, that context of the last 15 years of how some of those games have found their success, sometimes and often by accident. That I hope it helps someone in their career, in what they're developing or working on at the moment, or maybe in the future. Right, Sam, that's me done.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Mark, for that. A quick spin through 15 years. That's amazing. Thank you. There's been a couple of questions in the chat that I think you might want to help us with, if that's okay. Really interestingly, a question that's come through from Daniel around whether esports should be considered as a major sports event. You made that link earlier in your very long in the presentation about it. What's your sort of view on esport as a sport? Do you think it should be viewed in the same way that major sports events are viewed?
I think it's a really good question, but I also think it's a question that probably just shouldn't be answered anymore. And I don't mean that to be facetious, but the fact of the matter is that sport is played by people for a love and a passion, and that's exactly what these games are. Esports is now watched in most parts of the world and almost generically across the globe more than almost every sports. All the data will show you that. We have Twitch now. We have platforms where we can measure through data exactly that reach. It is bigger than it. I think the challenge becomes when a bunch of 30 or 40-year-olds, and I'm 45, so I count myself as one of that, try to make it fit what we know. But it isn't what we know. And again, it's just a personal opinion, get very bored of people telling me that it should be in the Olympics. Why? It doesn't have to be in the Olympics for it to be a legitimate, credible, exciting sport. Just because the Olympic Committee has their view on what a sport, what makes a sport and what doesn't, and all of the arguments for physicality within sports, but I don't see anybody saying that that chess and many other different mind games that are incredibly, unequivocally great sports are not a sport because of the fact that you don't have to get up and exercise for 5 hours a day. And actually, I think it's quite disrespectful for those athletes that are in esports that rely on fitness and nutrition to be able to be mentally ready for some of the competitions that they face. So for me, it is a sport. And actually, I think more and more so as we get through the next 5 or 10 years, that you'll have media companies just adopt esports as what they lead with sports. And it will be a parallel to the football that we watch, the Olympics that we watch, or the Super Bowl that we watch.
Oh, I do love the Super Bowl. Thank you for referencing that. Just final thought from you, if you don't mind. You talk about sort of the building community and the authenticity of this. That's a word we often hear when we talk about esports. How do you actually get authenticity? How do you earn that as a studio making a game? How do you get that sort of validation from the community?
It's easy and really hard all at the same time. And it's down to the approach that you are willing to take, or more importantly, can take naturally. If you can take it naturally, it's the easiest thing in the world. If you generally are a bunch of gamers who love games and love the game that you play and can't wait to engage with the audience and the community and listen to them and give back and do some cool things, and that, then it just happens. If you look at, I know it's not a game, but if you look at the approach that Discord took, something that has essentially taken over the world as far as the gaming communications tool, they were just freaking cool. They were just a bunch of gamers that knew what gamers wanted and went out there and built it for them. They didn't spend millions of dollars on marketing. I know I have had them as a client. They don't bugger all. The fact of the matter is that they gave the community something that they wanted. Now, the challenge is, if you're coming at that from a very big corporate publishing background, you're going to have a hard job of doing that. When you look like a corporation of a bunch of old white bald guys, you're going to have a real challenge to drive that authenticity, that you generally are someone that hangs out on Reddit, uses Discord as your default communication tool, and can't wait for the next cosplay event. You're going to struggle with that thing. So it's about trying to find the ways in which that you can have that engagement that just validates that. And it can't be one thing. You can't get it right on social and not have a good influencer strategy and not be present at events and not have the right kind of communication channels as well. You need all of those things. You can't just do one well. Sam, do you mind if I answer David's question with regards to inclusion within esports as well? Because it is something I am massively passionate about. depending on where you go, the accessibility into esports is pretty easy, because esports is that sport where the next champion can come from anywhere. And in that regards, I love its accessibility. What I don't like is there's no clear path through from someone starting from my daughter's age, who is 13 in 2 weeks' time, where she can go to join what to then see that natural progression through. There are starting these kind of academies coming through, but that big chasm between I want to play for a team and actually getting any chance to do that is undefined, and it's not easy. But this is still new. We will get there. What I do love about esports is that when it comes to gender, when it becomes to anything else, there is no barrier. There's no thing with football. I guess as much as it frustrates me, my daughter will probably never be able to play for Manchester United on the same field as the other guys. In esports, she can kick anybody's ass. And because of that, she has every right to be within a team of mixed gender, to be able to play at the highest levels. And I think because of that, it's what I love about esports more than I love about traditional sports, because that gives that accessibility for anybody to lead the world in any of these games. And frankly, there are some fantastic work that's being done on with controllers and other methods for getting people that have physical disabilities into esports as well. And some of them have proved to be incredibly successful within esports, even with some of the disabilities that they have. So for that kind of accessibility into esports, whilst it needs to be better defined and it needs to be better controlled, and I think there needs to be more responsibility taken for that kind of protection of people, whether it be because of their being young or female, or of an ethnicity, so there aren't the challenges that we have seen within esports as people come through the ranks. With those right controls, actually, I think it can be one of the most accessible sports on the planet.
Amazing. That's great messaging. Thank you very much for your time today, Mark. Really appreciate it. As insightful as ever.